My daughter-in-law threw my wife's ashes in the trash and said, "Stop crying over dust." I was standing in my own kitchen when she said it. The urn had been on the mantel beside my wife's wedding photo, her old library card, and the navy scarf she wore every winter. It was supposed to be a quiet memorial dinner. Then my daughter-in-law picked up the urn like it was an ugly vase. I told her, "Put her down." She smiled at my son. And my son, my own boy, looked at me and said, "Maybe she's right, Dad." Then she dropped the urn into the trash. I heard something inside it hit the metal bottom. A small sound. Too sharp. Too strange. Welcome to Final Act Revenge. Tell me where you're watching from tonight, and what time it is where you are. Please take care of your health while you listen, because when the lawyer opened that urn later, the room went dead silent. My name is Danny Johnson. I am 73 years old, and for most of my life, people in Cedar Rapids knew me as the quiet man behind the library desk. I was a head librarian for 34 years. Not the glamorous kind of job. No big applause, no corner office, no fancy retirement speech that anyone remembers. But I knew which children came in hungry after school. I knew which widows sat near the mystery shelves because they wanted company without having to ask for it. I knew which old men pretended to read newspapers just so they would not have to go home to silent rooms too early. A library teaches you people. And my wife, Lorna Johnson, understood people better than anyone I ever knew. Lorna taught literature at the high school before she retired. She had a voice that could make a room full of bored teenagers listen to poetry like it contained a warning meant just for them. She loved books, because books gave lonely people somewhere to put their hearts. She used to say, "People only become forgotten when the living stop making room for their names." That was Lorna. Soft voice, sharp mind. A woman who could correct your grammar and your character in the same sentence. We bought our house when Cedar Rapids still had pockets, where a teacher and a librarian could afford a decent place if they were willing to paint walls themselves and fix leaky sinks on weekends. And we did. I built the shelves in the south room by hand, crooked at first. Lorna teased me for 3 months. "Danny," she said, "you arrange books like a man preparing for war against dust." I told her dust was a worthy enemy. She laughed so hard she spilled tea on an old copy of Little Women, then insisted the stain made the book more honest. That south room became hers. Not officially, no plaque on the door, but everyone knew it. She filled it with paperbacks, thrift store chairs, little lamps, and a round table where people came every Saturday morning. Children who needed help reading. Older women who had buried husbands and did not want pity. Teenagers who pretended they hated books until Lorna found the one story that made them quiet. After she passed in 2023, I could not change that room. I tried once. I picked up her navy scarf from the chair, walked halfway to the closet, and turned right back around. Some objects are not clutter. Some objects are proof that love really lived in a place. That is why her urn stayed on the mantel, not because I thought Lorna was trapped inside it, not because I refused to live. Every morning, I touched the side of that urn before making coffee. Just once. A small hello. A small promise that her name still had room in the house we built. Peter knew that. My son grew up in those rooms. He did homework at that round table. He slept under blankets Lorna mended by hand. He watched his mother lend books to strangers who could not afford library fines. But grief made Peter different. Or maybe grief showed me what pressure had already done to him. He worked as a regional manager for a pharmacy chain, and by 2026, everything seemed more expensive for families like his. Insurance, groceries, gas, college savings, home repairs. Every bill looked like it had learned how to grow teeth. I understood pressure. What I did not understand was when pressure began teaching Peter to look at our home like money waiting to be unlocked. Amber understood houses in a different way. She worked as a home staging consultant, and she could walk through a room and see only what should be removed. Too many books, too many photos, Too much personality, too much past. To Amber, Lorna's reading room was dead space. The mantle was too personal. The urn was grief clutter. She used those words gently at first, like a nurse wrapping a needle in kindness. "Danny," she would say, "a healthy transition might help everyone." But I started noticing how often everyone meant them. Our house had risen in value to about $1.35 million. Not because we were rich, because the neighborhood changed. Buyers got hungry for older homes, and people with cash started seeing family memories as renovation opportunities. Lorna saw that coming before I did. A year before she died, she met several times with our estate attorney, Sylvia Hart. I knew there were trust papers. I knew there were home documents, but Lorna never told me every detail. She only said one thing that I remembered later. "If they ever try to turn this house into a price tag, Sylvia will know where the promise is kept." At the time, I thought she was being poetic. Lorna often was. But after Amber threw the urn away, that sentence stopped sounding like poetry. It sounded like instructions. Later that night, after Peter and Amber left, Tessa helped me wrap the urn in a clean towel. Her hands were shaking. She leaned close and whispered, "Grandpa, Mom has a folder in her bag. It says Johnson Quick Sale." And that was when I realized Amber had not come to remember Lorna. She had come prepared to remove her from the house before anyone could ask why. After Amber left, the house did not feel quiet. It felt bruised. There is a difference. Quiet is what happens when the television is off and the dishes are done. Bruised is when every object in the room seems to remember what people said beside it. I stood in the kitchen holding Lorna's urn against my chest, wrapped in a clean towel Tessa had brought from the hallway closet. The trash bin still stood open. I could see coffee grounds near the bottom, a paper plate, a crumpled napkin with frosting on it from the cake Lorna never got to eat. And for one terrible second, I imagined my wife's ashes lying among those things. I know that sounds unbearable. It was. I am not a man who yells much. 34 years in a library teaches you to lower your voice before you lose control. But that night, something inside me cracked. "Peter," I said. My son stopped near the dining room doorway. He did not turn fully toward me. He kept his body angled away, as if looking at me directly would make him responsible for what had just happened. "Look at your mother's picture," he swallowed. "Dad, look at it." Lorna's wedding photo sat on the mantel, tilted slightly from when Amber had snatched the urn beside it. Peter lifted his eyes for half a second, then looked down. That told me more than a confession would have. Amber stood behind him with her coat over one arm, breathing hard like she had been the injured person in the room. "Danny, this is exactly what I mean," she said. "You can't keep living inside a shrine." I turned toward her slowly. "A shrine?" "Yes, this house is frozen. The room, the books, the scarf, the urn. It's not healthy." Funny thing about people who use the word healthy. Sometimes they mean kind. Sometimes they mean convenient. Peter rubbed his forehead. "Dad, nobody wanted it to happen like that." I looked at the urn in my hands. "No?" Amber's eyes sharpened. "You're making this worse." That almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, because some people can set a fire and complain about smoke. Tessa stood near the stairs with her phone pressed against her sweater. Her face was pale. Milo had already run to the back room, crying into one of the couch pillows. That was when shame finally crossed Peter's face. Not enough to make him speak. Just enough to prove he still had a conscience he was choosing not to use. I asked him, "Did your mother become a shrine to you too?" He closed his eyes. Amber answered for him. "Your son is trying to help you move forward." "No," I said. "My son is trying not to choose." Peter flinched. Good. Some truths should hurt when they land. Amber grabbed her purse from the chair, A folder slipped halfway out before she pushed it back in quickly. Not quickly enough. I saw the label. Johnson Residence. Pre-listing strategy. My chest went cold. Amber noticed my eyes. "It's nothing," she said. "Then leave it on the table." She laughed once, sharp. "Danny, you don't understand how real estate works. I understand when someone brings paperwork to a memorial dinner." Peter finally spoke. "Dad, please don't turn this into a fight." I looked at him. "This became a fight when your wife put your mother in the trash." His face twisted then. Grief, guilt, fear. All of it moved across him, but none of it stayed long enough to become courage. Amber pulled him toward the door. "We'll talk when you're calm." Calm. Another word people use when they want the wounded person to stop bleeding where others can see it. When the front door closed, Tessa came down the stairs slowly. She looked younger than 16 in that moment. "Grandpa," she whispered, "I recorded some of it." I did not ask why. Children in broken rooms learn to protect truth before adults do. She played the audio softly. Amber's voice came through first. "This urn is the only thing keeping him from signing." Then Peter's voice, low and tired. "Not tonight, Amber." And then Amber again. "Tonight is exactly why. He's emotional. He'll sign before he talks to Sylvia." I sat down hard at the kitchen table. The urn stayed in my arms. Tessa's hand shook around the phone. "I'm sorry," she said. "No, sweetheart. You did right." A few minutes later, there was a knock at the back door. June Mercer stepped inside before I could even answer. June had lived next door for 26 years and had been a nurse long enough to stop asking polite questions when something smelled wrong. She looked at me, then the towel-wrapped urn, then the trash bin. Her mouth tightened. "I was a nurse for 30 years, she said. "I can smell a family lie before coffee finishes brewing." That was June, straight as a ruler and twice as hard to bend. She helped me set the urn on the table. Then she lit the white memorial candle again, as if restoring one small piece of order in a room that had forgotten decency. "What did Amber leave behind?" June asked. I pointed toward the dining chair. Amber's staging bag was still there. Tessa opened it carefully. Inside was the folder I had seen. Johnson Residence, Pre-listing Strategy. The first pages showed photos of my home, my mantel, my hallway. Lorna's south reading room. Red circles marked the things Amber wanted removed. Too many personal items, too many books, outdated widow furniture. Then we reached a page titled, "Remove Deceased Spouse Emotional Obstacles Before Showing." Under it were 4 items: urn, navy scarf, library chair, family reading table. For a moment, nobody spoke. Not me, not June, not Tessa. The whole house seemed to hold its breath. I thought Amber wanted my wife's urn off the mantel. Then I saw the folder and realized she wanted every trace of Lorna erased before the buyers arrived. June Mercer did not touch the folder right away. She stood over it with both hands on the back of a dining chair, staring down at those red circles like they were bruises on my house. Then she said, "Danny, you need to call Sylvia." I looked at her. "At this hour?" "At any hour," June said. "People who throw away ashes usually plan to throw away papers next." That sentence settled into me like cold water. Tessa sat across from me with her phone still in her hands. Her eyes kept moving from the folder to the urn, then back to the folder again. She was 16, too young to know adults could be this careful with cruelty, too old to be lied to like a child. I reached across the table and touched her wrist. "You don't have to carry this, sweetheart." She looked at me and whispered, "Grandpa, if I don't, they'll say it didn't happen." That broke my heart in a new place, because she was right. A lie inside a family does not need to win forever. It only needs to survive long enough for everyone to get tired. June went to the kitchen sink and washed her hands, slow and deliberate, like a nurse preparing for something unpleasant. Then she pulled a clean towel from the drawer and helped me unwrap the urn. There was a thin crack near the base. Not large, not dramatic. Just enough to make me feel like I had failed Lorna by not catching it before it hit the trash. June noticed my face. "Don't do that," she said. "Do what?" "Blame yourself for somebody else's dirty hands." I looked away. The white memorial candle flickered beside Lorna's library card. The card had gone soft at the edges from years of being carried in her coat pocket. She never liked digital library accounts, said they had no soul. I turned the urn slightly. There it was again, a tiny metallic tap. Tessa heard it too. Her eyes widened. June leaned closer. "What was that?" "I don't know." "Has it always made that sound?" "No." At least, I had never noticed it. But I had never shaken my wife's urn. I had never needed to. I set it down carefully. "I'm not opening it," I said. June nodded immediately. "Good. We let Sylvia handle that." Tessa wiped her cheeks with her sleeve and opened the folder again. The pages smelled faintly like perfume and printer ink. Amber's kind of preparation. Clean fonts, soft language, ugly purpose. One checklist had the title, "Memorial Items to Remove Before Walkthrough." Under it, written in neat bullets, urn, widow shrine, navy scarf, library chair, family reading table. I stared at the phrase widow shrine until the words stopped looking like English. That was my life to Amber. Not marriage, not grief, not 46 years of coffee, books, medical appointments, unpaid bills, Sunday pancakes, winter coats, and late-night laughter. A widow shrine. June pulled out her glasses and read the page. Then she said, "I have seen hospital charts with more warmth than this." Tessa almost laughed, a tiny sound. Then she covered her mouth like laughter was not allowed in a room this hurt. But Lorna would have liked it. She believed grief needed air, not just tears. We kept reading. Another page showed photos of the South reading room. Red arrows pointed at Lorna's chair, the wall of books, the round table, and Milo's little handmade bookmarks taped near the lamp. Beside the photo, Amber had written, "Convert to neutral flex space. Remove deceased spouse emotional weight." Emotional weight. I touched the table with one finger. That table had held children's books, teacups, sympathy cards, birthday cupcakes, crossword puzzles, and June's terrible lemon cookies that Lorna always pretended were improving. It had held life. Amber saw weight. My phone rang. Peter. Tessa looked terrified. June crossed her arms. I answered, but did not put it on speaker. "Dad," Peter said, sounding tired, "Amber thinks you're making this bigger than it needs to be." I closed my eyes. There it was. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "How is the urn?" Not, "I should have stopped her." Just, "Smaller, please." "I found the folder," I said. Silence. Long enough to tell me he knew exactly which folder. Then Peter said, "It's just preliminary." "Preliminary for what?" "Dad, the house is too much for you." "The house or my memories?" He breathed through his nose. "I can't do this tonight." "You already did." He lowered his voice. "Don't call Sylvia before we talk." That was the moment June's warning became more than neighbor suspicion. Papers. They were worried about papers. "Why?" I asked. "Because she'll turn this into a legal mess." "No, Peter. Your wife put your mother in a trash can. That was the mess." He said nothing. Then, very quietly, he said, "I didn't want it to happen that way." That way. As if there was a better way to erase a woman. I ended the call. Not because I had no more words. Because I had too many. June reached for my hand. "Now you call Sylvia." So I did. Sylvia Hart answered on the fourth ring, her voice calm but awake. I told her only the facts. The urn, the trash, the metallic sound. The folder, Peter's call. When I finished, Sylvia was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Danny, do not open the urn. Do not sign anything. Do not let anyone remove documents, furniture, or personal effects from the house." My throat tightened. "Sylvia, did Lorna leave something?" Another pause, a careful one. "Bring the urn to me tomorrow," she said, "and bring anyone who saw what happened." I looked at June, then at Tessa, then at Lorna's cracked urn under the candlelight. Before I could answer, Tessa pulled one more page from Amber's folder. It was a schedule. Buyer soft walkthrough, Friday, 2:30 p.m. Under notes, one sentence was highlighted. Owner, emotional resistance expected. Son will assist. I thought Peter had failed to stop Amber. Then I saw that schedule and realized my son had been assigned a role in pushing me out. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. Not because I had slept well, because grief changes the way old men rest. You do not really sleep anymore. You drift in and out of memories until daylight interrupts them. For a few seconds, I forgot what had happened. Then I saw the empty space beside the kitchen trash bin and remembered my wife had spent part of the night in it. I sat at the table with black coffee and stared at Lorna's urn. The crack near the base looked worse in morning light. Not larger, just sadder. June Mercer came over around 7 carrying banana bread nobody had asked for. That was June's version of emotional support. She set it on the counter and pointed at the urn. "You taking that to Sylvia today?" "Yes." "Good." Then she looked at me harder. "You eaten anything?" I lifted the coffee mug. "That is not food, Danny. It's bean soup." That earned me half a smile. Tiny moments matter after humiliation. People underestimate that. Sometimes survival is just someone still speaking to you like life has not ended. After June left, I walked into the south reading room, Lorna's room. Morning light came through the windows exactly the way she liked it. Soft across the shelves, warm near the chair by the lamp. The room still smelled faintly like old paper and cinnamon tea. I stood there for a long time, not moving, just listening. Houses make sounds when they know you. Floorboards settle differently beneath familiar grief. I ran my fingers along the bookshelf I built 30 years ago. The wood still had tiny dents from Peter crashing toy trucks into it when he was 6. That shelf had survived floods, layoffs, medical bills, Iowa winters, and one Labrador puppy with terrible judgment. Now, it was apparently dead space. Amber's words would not leave my head. Dead space. Deceased spouse emotional weight. Neutral flex room. She spoke about memory the way people talk about water damage. I looked toward the round table in the middle of the room. Lorna used to host reading circles there every Saturday morning. Children sat cross-legged on the rug while she read Charlotte's Web like it was sacred scripture. Widows brought pie. Retired teachers argued about novels nobody under 50 had heard of. Sometimes lonely people came just to hear another voice inside a warm room. Lorna never embarrassed them by noticing. That was her gift. She protected dignity quietly. I opened one drawer beneath the lamp table and found Milo's handmade bookmarks tied together with blue ribbon. One had a crooked little drawing of Lorna wearing giant glasses. Another read, "Books help people stay." My chest tightened. Because that was exactly what Amber was trying to erase. Not furniture, not clutter. Proof that people had stayed loved in this house. My phone buzzed. Amber. I almost ignored it. Almost. "Danny," she said immediately, using that careful voice people use before asking for money or forgiveness. "We need to clear up misunderstandings." Throwing ashes in the trash felt pretty clear. A sharp breath came through the line. "You are twisting what happened." "No, I'm remembering it." "You're emotional." There it was again, that word, like grief was some kind of illness they needed to manage before paperwork could continue. I looked around the reading room. My wife taught children to read in this room. Amber sighed. "And that was beautiful 20 years ago, but now It's wasted square footage. Wasted. I closed my eyes. You see a resale brochure when you walk through this house, I said quietly. I see my life. She lowered her voice. Peter is trying to protect your future. No, Peter is trying to survive yours. Silence. Then she slipped, a tiny crack in her mask. Danny, houses like this don't stay valuable forever. Not family homes, assets. That was the real language underneath everything. I ended the call without saying goodbye. Then I noticed something strange near Lorna's chair. A small yellow sticker. Home staging tape. I bent down slowly. There were more. Tiny, color-coded tabs hidden beneath furniture edges. Blue for remove, yellow for donate, red for replace. Amber had already started marking the room before the memorial dinner. I felt physically cold. Not angry yet. Cold. Because planning hurts differently than impulse. An insult in anger can still belong to emotion. Preparation belongs to intention. I checked beneath the reading table. Another sticker. Then one beneath Lorna's lamp. Then one attached to the basket where she kept children's library cards. I sat down heavily in her chair. The room suddenly felt invaded, measured, priced, reduced. That was when Tessa texted me. Grandpa, Mom told Dad the reading room scares buyers because it feels like a grief museum. A second text followed immediately. I heard them arguing last week. Dad said maybe you should keep the room. Mom said, sentimental rooms don't close deals. I stared at those words for a long time. Peter had argued. Small detail, but important. It meant he still knew something was wrong. He just did not stop it. And sometimes weakness destroys people almost as efficiently as cruelty does. Around noon, I carried the urn carefully into the kitchen and wrapped it in a fresh towel. Before leaving for Sylvia's office, I walked back into the reading room one more time. I touched the back of Lorna's chair. Then I looked at the shelves. Every scar on the wood had a story. Every book had fingerprints. Every object still carried somebody's loneliness, healing, laughter, heartbreak, or survival. Dead space. God help me. Amber had walked into the warmest room in the house and only seen square footage. Before I could leave, my phone rang again. This time it was Sylvia Hart. Her voice sounded calmer than mine, but heavier. Danny, she said carefully, before you come over, I need to ask you something. I tightened my grip on the urn. All right. Did Lorna ever mention a memorial home clause? The room went silent around me, because suddenly I remembered my wife standing exactly where I was now, one rainy afternoon, saying words I thought were poetry at the time. If they ever try to turn this house into a price tag, Sylvia will know where the promise is kept. And for the first time since the urn hit the trash can, I began to wonder if Lorna had seen all of this coming long before I did. Sylvia Hart's office sat above an old insurance building downtown, across from a bakery that still smelled like cinnamon every morning. Lorna used to love that bakery. Every time we had appointments with Sylvia, she made me stop there first, because she claimed legal paperwork was easier to survive with sugar. That memory hit me hard when I parked outside. Not because I suddenly missed pastries, because grief is strange. Sometimes a smell hurts more than a funeral. I carried the urn carefully against my chest as I walked upstairs. Sylvia opened the office door herself. Tall woman, silver hair, calm eyes. The kind of person who could lower her voice and somehow make everyone else feel louder than they intended to be. The moment she saw the crack in the urn, something changed in her expression. Not shock. Recognition. She led me into her office without wasting words. June Mercer came, too. Tessa sat beside me, holding her backpack against her knees like armor. Sylvia closed the blinds before speaking. Danny, she said quietly, before we discuss legal documents, I need to ask one thing clearly. All right. Did anyone besides you hear the metallic sound? June answered first. I did. Tessa nodded immediately. Sylvia leaned back in her chair. Then she looked directly at the urn for several long seconds. I finally asked, "What did Lorna do?" A small smile touched Sylvia's face. "Exactly what I told her not to do." That startled me. For the first time since the memorial dinner, curiosity pushed through the grief. Sylvia folded her hands together. About a year before Lorna passed, she became concerned about pressure surrounding the house. I frowned. Pressure from who? She never named Amber directly, but she understood personalities very well. That sounded like Lorna. She always noticed storms before clouds appeared. Sylvia continued. She worried that after her death, grief might be used against you. That sentence settled heavily in the room, because that was exactly what had happened. Not just sadness, management, containment, removal. Amber kept treating my mourning like an obstacle slowing down a business transaction. Sylvia reached toward the urn but stopped herself. I need Wayne Fletcher present before this is opened. The funeral director? I asked. Yes. Why? Because if Lorna did what I think she did, we need a neutral witness. June let out a low whistle. Well, she muttered, this family just upgraded from emotional disaster to legal theater. Even Sylvia laughed softly at that. Tiny moment, tiny breath of air. Then Sylvia turned serious again. Danny, has Peter asked you to sign anything yet? Not directly. But he's trying to stop you from involving me? Yes. Sylvia nodded slowly, like someone solving an equation she already disliked. That means the pressure is accelerating. Tessa looked confused. What does that mean? Sylvia looked at her kindly. It means some people move faster when they think control is slipping away. The room went quiet. I suddenly remembered Amber's color-coded stickers beneath the furniture. Blue for remove, yellow for donate, red for replace. My wife's life reduced to inventory categories. I felt sick again. Sylvia stood and walked toward a locked cabinet. She pulled out a thin folder marked Johnson Family Trust. Not thick, not dramatic, but the way she handled it told me my life had been quietly rearranged long before I realized it. Lorna updated several documents in 2023, Sylvia explained. Most were normal estate revisions. Most? Another pause. There was one addition she called a dignity safeguard. That phrase hit me hard, because Lorna understood something I did not. People can survive grief. What destroys them is humiliation attached to grief. Before I could ask more, Sylvia's receptionist knocked lightly and opened the office door. Mr. Fletcher is here. Wayne Fletcher walked in, carrying a small leather case. Mid-60s, careful voice, the kind of man who had spent decades speaking softly around mourning families. The moment he saw the urn, his shoulders tightened. I heard what happened, he said quietly. I nodded once. Wayne placed the leather case on Sylvia's desk. Then he looked at me. Danny, before we do anything, I need you to understand something. Lorna made a very unusual request before cremation. I stared at him. What request? Wayne glanced at Sylvia first, then back to me. She asked for a sealed compartment to be installed beneath the base chamber. The room stopped moving. Even June went silent. Tessa whispered, What? Wayne spoke carefully. It does not touch the ashes. Completely separate structure. Legal, documented, but highly unusual. I sat perfectly still. Suddenly, every strange moment from the last 2 days connected together. The metallic sound, Sylvia's reaction, Lorna's words about promises, the dignity safeguard. I looked down at the urn in my hands. For the first time since Lorna died, I felt like she was still protecting me. Wayne opened his leather case and removed soft gloves and a small tool. Do you want to proceed now? He asked, gently. I almost said yes, almost. But then my phone buzzed. Peter. Again. Sylvia motioned for silence. I answered. My son sounded nervous, not angry, worried. Dad, where are you? That depends. Why? Long pause. Then he said something that changed the entire shape of the story. Robbie Miles is coming by the house this afternoon. I frowned. The realtor? Peter inhaled sharply. It's not official. Then why is he walking through my home? He just wants to evaluate options. Options. Always soft words, never honest ones. I looked toward Sylvia. Her expression darkened immediately. Peter, I said slowly, did you schedule a buyer walkthrough before speaking to me? No? Not fast enough. Too careful. A man searching for safe wording instead of truth. Then, quietly, he added, Amber thought seeing market numbers might help you make practical decisions. Practical. Another ugly little word. Did you tell Robbie you had authority to show my house? Silence. Then Peter answered with the sentence that finally broke whatever protection remained around my denial. I told him I was helping manage the transition. Transition. Not grief, not family, not mourning. Transition. I closed my eyes, because suddenly I understood something terrible. Peter no longer spoke like my son. He spoke like someone already rehearsing ownership. When the call ended, Sylvia stood immediately. Nobody enters that property without you present, she said firmly. Wayne carefully placed his hand on the urn, and then he spoke the sentence that made every hair on my arms rise. Danny, whatever Lorna hid in this compartment, I do not think she intended you to find it after her death. I looked at him. Then when? Wayne's voice dropped lower. I think she intended you to find it the moment someone tried to erase her. For a long time, nobody moved. Not me, not Sylvia Hart, not Wayne Fletcher. Even June Mercer stopped making nervous little comments under her breath, which might have been the first sign this situation had officially become larger than any of us expected. Wayne rested both hands carefully beside the urn. I need your permission before I open the compartment, he said softly. I looked down at the crack near the base. Lorna had been gone nearly 3 years, and somehow, sitting in Sylvia's office, I felt closer to her than I had since the funeral. Not because of the ashes, because of the planning. Lorna had not hidden sentiment inside that urn. She had hidden timing. I nodded slowly. Open it. Wayne put on his gloves. His movements were respectful, deliberate, almost ceremonial. He turned the urn carefully and located a thin seam beneath the lower base plate. Tessa leaned forward in her chair. June crossed herself quietly, even though she had not been inside a church since the Clinton administration. Sylvia watched without blinking. Wayne inserted a small tool into the seam. Click! The sound was tiny, but it changed everything. A narrow brass cylinder slid partially free from beneath the urn. Metal. That was the sound I heard when Amber threw my wife into the trash. Not broken ceramic, protection. Tessa covered her mouth with both hands. Oh my God! Wayne carefully removed the cylinder and placed it on Sylvia's desk. It was old brass, scratched slightly, about the length of a fountain pen. Lorna's style exactly. She hated flashy things, believed important objects should look ordinary enough to survive being ignored. Sylvia stared at the capsule for several seconds before speaking. She actually did it! There was frustration in her voice, and admiration. Wayne nodded once. She made me promise not to tell Danny unless the compartment was discovered naturally. I looked at him sharply. You knew? I knew something existed, he corrected gently. Not what was inside. Sylvia opened the brass capsule slowly. Inside were 4 items. A folded handwritten letter, a small silver key, a notarized document packet, and a cream-colored note card. Sylvia picked up the note card first. Her eyes moved across the sentence. Then she handed it to me. My hands shook when I read it. If they throw away my memory, do not let them inherit my home. Lorna. Nobody spoke. I read it again, and again. Then I laughed once. Not because anything was funny, because suddenly I could hear my wife's voice so clearly it almost hurt. Lorna always noticed people completely, even the parts they hoped nobody saw. Sylvia opened the legal packet next. The heading read, Memorial Home Clause, Johnson Family Trust Amendment. 2023 June let out a low whistle. Well, she muttered, that woman stayed 10 steps ahead right into the afterlife. That earned the smallest smile from Sylvia. Then she began reading aloud. The clause stated that if any beneficiary, spouse, or family representative attempted to pressure Danny Johnson into selling the primary residence through emotional coercion, remove memorial property without consent, use grief or age-related vulnerability to influence housing decisions, stage, market, or negotiate the property without independent legal counsel for Danny, or disrespect memorial remains connected to Lorna Johnson. Then all property transition authority connected to Peter Johnson would be immediately suspended. I stared at Sylvia. What does that mean? It means, she said calmly, Peter no longer has any standing in trust-related housing decisions if this clause activates. June blinked twice. Tell me you're serious. Sylvia slid the paperwork toward me. She anticipated this exact scenario. My chest tightened so hard it hurt, because suddenly every strange thing from the last few days rearranged itself into a shape I could finally understand. Lorna saw danger long before I did. Not violence, not theft. Something quieter. People treating grief like weakness. Tessa wiped tears from her cheeks. She knew Mom would do this? No, Sylvia said carefully. I think she knew pressure would come eventually. The details surprised even her. Wayne pointed gently toward another paragraph. There's more, and Sylvia continued reading. The Memorial Home Clause also triggered immediate review of any listing activity, suspension of unauthorized staging agreements, mandatory independent counsel before any property sale, and activation of something called the Memory Room Addendum. That last phrase hit me hard, because the South Reading Room had been the center of Lorna's life. What's the addendum? I asked. Sylvia removed another document. Her expression softened before she read. The reading room located on the south side of the Johnson residence shall remain protected community memorial space while Danny Johnson is living, unless voluntarily altered through written independent consent. Protected. Not sentimental. Not decorative. Protected. Tessa began crying openly then. She saved the room, she whispered. No. Lorna saved more than a room. She saved dignity. That was the real thing Amber never understood. Some objects are not expensive. Some rooms are not modern. Some memories do not increase property value, but they keep human beings from disappearing. My phone rang suddenly. Peter again. The timing almost made June laugh. Boy's got the instincts of a raccoon near a campground, she muttered. I answered slowly. Dad, Peter said immediately. Robbie is at the house and says you're not answering the door. I looked at Sylvia, then at the trust documents, then at Lorna's handwriting, and for the first time since the memorial dinner, I did not feel helpless. Peter, I said quietly, did you tell a realtor my home was available? He hesitated. Too long. Then, we were only exploring options. Using whose authority? Dad, no. Answer me. Silence. Finally, he said, I'm trying to prevent things from getting harder later. There it was again. Not grief, not love. Management, efficiency, transition. I could almost hear Amber coaching him through the language. Sylvia motioned for the phone. I handed it over. Her voice became pure steel. Peter, this is Sylvia Hart. Effective immediately. All property-related authority connected to the Johnson Family Trust is suspended pending legal review under the Memorial Home Clause. Complete silence on the line. Then Peter whispered, What clause? That sentence broke something inside me, because my son truly had no idea what his mother had prepared. Sylvia continued calmly, You and Amber are instructed not to schedule walkthroughs, staging consultations, listing activity, donation removal, or elder transition planning involving Danny Johnson's residence until further notice. Peter sounded panicked now. "Dad, what is happening?" I finally answered. "Your mother heard the way people talk when they think old men are easier to move than furniture." Silence. Then the line disconnected. Nobody spoke for several seconds after that. Wayne carefully repacked the brass capsule. June sat back slowly in her chair. Tessa stared at the documents like they were sacred. And me? I looked down at Lorna's handwriting again. "If they throw away my memory, do not let them inherit my home." That was not revenge. Not really. It was something older. A wife protecting the last fragile pieces of her husband's dignity after she was gone. Then Sylvia turned one final page in the packet, and her expression changed completely. "What is it?" I asked. She looked up slowly. "Danny, there's a second protection clause here." My stomach tightened. "What kind of clause?" Sylvia's eyes moved back to the page. Then she said the sentence that made the entire room go cold. "Lorna believed someone might eventually try to move you out of the house entirely." I did not drive home right away after leaving Sylvia's office. I sat in my truck outside the courthouse parking lot for nearly 40 minutes, with Lorna's urn resting carefully on the passenger seat beside me. The brass capsule, the memorial home clause, the memory room addendum. All of it should have made me feel safer. Instead, I felt tired. Because sometimes the worst pain is realizing the person who loved you most had to prepare defenses against your own family before she even died. Rain tapped softly against the windshield. I kept hearing Sylvia's last sentence over and over. Lorna believed someone might eventually try to move you out of the house entirely. Not sell the house. Move me out. That difference mattered. Selling property is financial. Removing a grieving old man from the center of his own life is something else entirely. By the time I finally pulled into the driveway, dusk had started settling over the neighborhood. The porch light was already on. I frowned immediately. I never left it on during the day. Then I noticed the front door was slightly open, not wide, just enough to make my stomach tighten. I stepped inside quietly and stopped breathing for a second. The south reading room had been touched, not destroyed, worse, organized. Half the shelves were missing books. Cardboard boxes sat stacked beside the wall with neat labels written in black marker. Donate, archive, sort. Lorna's navy scarf was folded inside one of the donation boxes. I stared at it so long my vision blurred. That scarf still smelled faintly like her lavender lotion, if you held it close enough. Amber had put it beside old magazines and throw pillows like it was seasonal clutter. I walked deeper into the room slowly. Milo's handmade bookmarks were gone from the lamp table. The chair near the window had been tagged with another yellow staging sticker, and taped to the bookshelf was a printed note. Remove personal grief items before photography. Photography, not memory, not mourning. Photography. My knees almost gave out. I sat heavily in Lorna's chair and looked around the room she built one gentle Saturday at a time. This was where she helped widows relearn how to laugh without apologizing for it. Where children learned reading was not punishment. Where lonely people sat quietly drinking tea while snow fell outside. Now the room looked like strangers had started disassembling it while I was still alive. I heard movement in the kitchen. Candace Voss walked in carrying a leather portfolio and froze when she saw me. Mid-50s. Perfect posture. Soft beige coat. The kind of woman trained to speak calmly while delivering devastating information. "Oh," she said carefully. "Mr. Johnson, I didn't realize you were home." That sentence alone told me too much. I stood slowly. "Who are you?" She offered a professional smile. "My name is Candace Voss. I work in senior transition consulting." Senior transition. There it was, the second protection clause. Lorna knew. Candace glanced around nervously. "Amber said this would be a good time to begin evaluating the space." "The space." She shifted awkwardly. "The home." "No," I said quietly. "You meant space." Her expression tightened. That was when I noticed the folder in her hands. Johnson's senior transition packet. I felt physically cold again. Not angry yet. Cold. Because organized betrayal always arrives in folders. Candace stepped closer carefully, like approaching an injured animal. Mr. Johnson, families often struggle during grief transitions. My wife is not a transition. She stopped speaking. Good. I walked to the table and opened the packet myself. Inside were brochures, assisted living facilities, downsizing plans, estate transition timelines. One page had my name typed neatly across the top. Projected relocation window. 6 weeks. 6 weeks. 6 weeks after my wife's memorial dinner. 6 weeks until my life became easier to sell. I kept turning pages. Then I found it. Property transition support. Contact Peter Johnson, my son. I sat down slowly at the table because suddenly my legs did not trust me anymore. Candace lowered her voice. Mr. Johnson, I genuinely thought you had agreed to begin discussions. I looked up at her. Who told you that? She hesitated, then answered honestly. Amber did. Of course she did. Candace pointed toward the reading room. She said preserving too many memorial spaces was increasing emotional dependency. Dependency. Not love, not healing, not continuity. Dependency. Every ugly thing becomes easier once people replace human words with management language. I turned another page. Move preparation checklist. Medication review. Furniture liquidation estimate. Emotional resistance expected. That line almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, because apparently grief now came with scheduling categories. Candace noticed my face changing, and, to her credit, real shame finally appeared. I think, she said quietly, I may have misunderstood the situation. No, I replied. I think you understood it exactly the way Amber wanted. Silence filled the kitchen. Then I heard another sound. Soft crying. I turned. Milo stood near the hallway clutching 2 bent bookmarks against his chest. One of them had a footprint on it. He looked at me with red eyes. She said Grandma's room had to stop looking sad. That did it. Not the folders, not the staging stickers, not the brochures. That sentence. Because children always tell the truth in the simplest possible way. I knelt beside him carefully. Who said that? Mom. His voice cracked. She threw my bookmarks away. I took the bent paper gently from his hands. One had been folded nearly in half. The other still had his crooked handwriting across the front. Books help people stay. My throat closed completely. Candace looked horrified now. Not legally horrified. Humanly horrified. Good. I wanted at least one witness who could still recognize cruelty without needing paperwork. Then my phone rang. Sylvia Hart. I answered immediately. Before I could even speak, Sylvia said, Danny, I just reviewed another document connected to the second clause. I looked around the half-packed reading room. The donation boxes, the scarf, the stickers, Milo's damaged bookmarks, Candace standing frozen beside the kitchen table. And suddenly I understood something terrifying. Amber had not started planning after the memorial dinner. She had already been planning before it happened. My voice came out thin. What kind of document? Sylvia paused. Then she answered carefully. An assisted living preparation authorization draft, with Peter listed as property transition support. I closed my eyes. Because in that moment, sitting inside the room my wife built with kindness, I realized my son had not simply failed to defend my mother's memory. He had already signed paperwork preparing for my removal before her ashes ever hit the trash. After Sylvia's call ended, I sat alone at the kitchen table for a long time. Candace Voss had quietly left 10 minutes earlier, but her folder was still sitting beside me like a diagnosis nobody wanted to say out loud. Johnson's senior transition packet. Projected relocation window. 6 weeks. Property transition support. Peter Johnson. I kept staring at my son's name. Not because I could not read it, because I could. That was the problem. There are moments in life when betrayal stops being emotional and becomes administrative. That was one of them. The reading room behind me looked wounded. Half-empty shelves, donation boxes, color-coded stickers, Milo's bent bookmarks beside the lamp. The whole house felt like people had already started dismantling me while smiling politely to my face. I finally stood and walked into the garage because I needed air. Instead, I found another box. Brown cardboard, sealed halfway with packing tape, written across the side in Amber's neat handwriting, Danny, temporary items, temporary. Inside were framed family photos, my winter coat, 3 coffee mugs, a blood pressure machine, and the small electric blanket Lorna bought me after my shoulder surgery. Not packed for moving rooms, packed for removal. I sat down hard on an old paint bucket beside the lawn tools and stared at the box until my eyes blurred. 46 years of marriage reduced to temporary items. That was the lowest point, not the urn, not the yelling, not even Peter's silence. This, the realization that my life had already been measured down to what could fit in a relocation box. I do not know how long I sat there before June Mercer walked into the garage carrying grocery bags. She took one look at my face and immediately set the bags down. What happened? I pointed at the box. That was all. June read the label slowly. Then she closed her eyes for a second. Oh, Danny. No speeches. No dramatic gasp. Just those 2 words spoken by somebody old enough to understand what humiliation feels like after 70. She opened the box carefully. When she saw the electric blanket, her mouth tightened. That woman already packed your comfort items. Comfort items. Like I was being prepared for assisted living before anyone told me. June suddenly became furious. Not loud furious. The dangerous, quiet kind. She planned this, she said. Yes. How long? I think longer than any of us realized. June looked around the garage slowly. Then she spotted another stack near the wall. Donation bags. One was partially open. Inside was Lorna's reading lamp. Another contained old hardcover books from the reading circle. And beneath them, Lorna's framed retirement photo from the school district. I picked it up carefully. The glass had cracked. That almost destroyed me. Not because it was expensive, because Lorna had smiled so proudly in that picture. She wore a blue cardigan and held flowers from her students. One kid had written, "Thank you for making books feel safe" on the card tucked into the bouquet. Amber threw that photo into a donation bag like it was expired holiday decoration. June touched my arm gently. You call Sylvia back yet? No. You should. I nodded. But before I could move, headlights swept across the driveway. Peter, of course. He stepped into the garage slowly, breathing hard like he had rushed over after hearing something from Candace. The moment he saw the box beside me, his entire face changed. Guilt. Real guilt this time. Dad! I stood. My knees hurt. My chest hurt worse. What is this? Peter rubbed both hands over his face. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. There it was, again. Not denial. Sequence management. As if cruelty only became wrong when timing failed. I pointed toward the box. You packed my things. No. Amber started organizing. Did you stop her? Silence. June crossed her arms. Answer your father. Peter looked exhausted suddenly. Not evil, not heartless. Weak. That was the tragedy. Weak people often stand beside terrible things long enough to become part of them. She thought the transition would be easier if the house looked cleaner first, he said quietly. Cleaner. Another ugly little word. I stepped closer. She threw your mother's ashes into a trash can. Peter's eyes filled immediately. I know. No. You know it happened. That's different. That hit him hard. Good, because I was tired of protecting his comfort while mine was being boxed up in the garage. Peter sat down heavily on the workbench. Then, for the first time, he finally told the truth. Not all of it. Enough. The pharmacy company cut bonuses last year, he admitted quietly. We're behind on the house. Harper's college savings got hit. Amber said if we sold this place and downsized you somewhere safer, everybody could breathe again. There it was. Money, fear, pressure, not cartoon evil. American middle-class panic wrapped in entitlement. I looked at him carefully. And Mom's ashes? Peter lowered his head. Amber wanted the memorial dinner to become the emotional break point. I felt sick hearing the phrase. She thought if the room changed all at once, if the urn disappeared, you'd finally stop clinging to the house. Clinging. Another management word. June shook her head slowly, like she could no longer believe the conversation was real. Peter looked up at me then, and I swear for 1 second, he looked 12 years old again. I didn't want to hurt you, I answered honestly. You already did. Silence swallowed the garage. Then Peter said something that made everything even worse. Robbie already scheduled a soft buyer walkthrough before the memorial dinner. I froze. Before. Not after the fight. Before. The humiliation had not created the plan. The plan had created the humiliation. My stomach turned. When? 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks. 3 entire weeks while I sat in that reading room drinking coffee beside Lorna's books. My son and his wife were preparing to transition me out of my own life. Peter spoke quickly now, desperate. Dad, Amber said if we waited until you talked to Sylvia, the house would never sell. The house. Always the house. Never me. Never grief. Never dignity. June suddenly stepped forward. You let your wife turn your dead mother into leverage for a real estate deal? Peter flinched, like she slapped him. Good, because somebody needed to say it without softening the language. Then his phone buzzed. Amber. He stared at the screen but did not answer. I noticed something then. Fear. Not of me. Of her. Interesting. Peter finally whispered, She thinks I ruined everything by telling you. That was the first time I understood the truth completely. Amber had not simply manipulated my grief. She had built an entire narrative around my removal. The urn, the reading room, the donation boxes, the assisted living packet, the buyer walkthrough, all of it connected, not random cruelty, a strategy. I walked past Peter without another word and carried Lorna's cracked retirement photo back into the house. I placed it carefully beside the urn on the mantel. Then I noticed something sitting near the front door. A white envelope, no stamp, no mailing label. Just my name written across the front in Sylvia Hart's handwriting. Inside was a copied email chain, from Amber to Robbie Miles. Subject line, clear grief clutter before buyer photography. Below it, one sentence had been highlighted by Sylvia. Once Danny signs transition support, we can finally stop treating the house like a mausoleum and start treating it like an asset. I stared at that sentence until the words blurred. Then I looked toward Lorna's reading room and realized my wife had not hidden legal protection inside that urn because she feared greed. She hid it because she knew some people eventually stop seeing human beings at all. They only see usable space. The legal review meeting happened 3 days later. Not in a courtroom. Not in some dramatic downtown office. In my living room. The same room where Amber threw my wife's ashes into the trash. Sylvia Hart said that mattered. People should face what they did in the room where they did it, she told me quietly that morning. So we left everything exactly where it belonged. Lorna's urn sat on the mantel again. The crack near the base had been repaired carefully by Wayne Fletcher, but if you looked closely, you could still see the line, like bone after healing. The navy scarf rested beneath the urn now. Not decoration, protection. June Mercer lit the white memorial candle before anyone arrived. Then she looked at me and said, "If anybody starts acting foolish, I'm too old to stay polite." That almost made me smile. Almost. Peter arrived first, alone. That surprised me. He looked exhausted. eyes red, shirt wrinkled, like a man who had spent several nights discovering guilt does not let people sleep. "Where's Amber?" I asked. "She's coming." Of course she was. Amber never missed moments involving property. Tessa sat beside the reading room doorway, holding Milo's bookmarks in her lap. The poor kid stayed with June's sister that afternoon because nobody wanted him hearing adults dismantle each other in legal language. Wayne Fletcher arrived next, carrying his leather case. Then Candace Voss. Then Robbie Miles, looking deeply uncomfortable in an expensive blazer that suddenly seemed too polished for the room. Finally, Amber walked in. Perfect makeup, perfect coat, perfect posture. She stopped smiling the second she saw Sylvia seated beside the urn. "Good." Sylvia motioned calmly toward the dining table. "Please sit." Nobody argued. That was the thing about Sylvia Hart. She never raised her voice because she never needed to. Amber sat beside Peter and immediately crossed one leg over the other. Defensive elegance. "I still think this entire situation is emotionally distorted," she said. June muttered, "Well, throwing dead women into garbage cans tends to distort a room." Peter shut his eyes immediately. Candace looked down. Even Robbie shifted uncomfortably. Amber ignored all of them and looked directly at me. "Danny, nobody wanted to hurt you," I answered calmly. "You already explained that, several times." That unsettled her more than anger would have, because people preparing for emotional manipulation do not know what to do with dignity. Sylvia opened the meeting without ceremony. "This review concerns unauthorized transition planning, unauthorized property staging activity, emotional coercion connected to the Johnson residence, and violations connected to the Memorial Home Clause Amendment." Amber blinked once. "What clause?" The exact same words Peter asked. Interesting. That meant he truly had not told her everything after the phone call. Sylvia nodded toward Wayne Fletcher. "Mr. Fletcher, please confirm the sealed compartment installation." Wayne spoke gently but clearly. In 2023, at Lorna Johnson's request, a separate sealed compartment was legally installed beneath the urn's base chamber. The compartment never came into contact with cremated remains and was documented through funeral records. Amber stared at the urn. For the first time since this nightmare began, she looked uncertain. "Good." Wayne carefully opened the brass capsule again and handed the documents to Sylvia. The room became very quiet. Even the house seemed to listen. Sylvia unfolded the handwritten note first. Then she read it aloud. "If they throw away my memory, do not let them inherit my home. Lorna." Nobody moved. Peter lowered his head immediately. Amber opened her mouth like she wanted to interrupt, but no sound came out. Tessa started crying silently. I kept my eyes on the candle flame because looking directly at Lorna's handwriting hurt too much. Sylvia continued. "The Memorial Home Clause activates if memorial property is disrespected, if emotional coercion is used to pressure Danny Johnson into housing decisions, or if unauthorized transition activity begins without independent counsel." She placed several documents onto the table one by one. Amber's staging checklists, the buyer walkthrough schedule, the assisted living packet, the email chain, the transition support authorization. Every soft little management phrase suddenly looked uglier under daylight. Candace finally spoke. "I was informed Mr. Johnson had agreed to preliminary discussions." "I never did," I answered. Candace nodded slowly. "I understand that now." Amber leaned forward immediately. "This is being exaggerated. Families discuss downsizing all the time." June barked out a dry laugh. "Families also usually avoid throwing mothers into trash bins before discussing it." Peter whispered, "Amber, stop." But she could not. Because people who survive through control often panic when the room stops following their version of reality. Amber pointed toward the reading room. "That room is unhealthy. It's frozen in grief." I looked at her quietly. "That room taught lonely children how to read." Silence. I continued. "It helped widows survive after funerals. It gave teenagers somewhere safe to sit after school. My wife spent 20 years turning that room into warmth for other people. Amber crossed her arms. And now it's a museum. No, I said softly. You just never learned the difference between memory and clutter. That landed hard. Even Robbie looked away. Sylvia opened the final document. The Memory Room Addendum officially protects the South Reading Room from conversion, staging removal, liquidation, or property repurposing, while Danny Johnson remains living in the residence. Amber's face changed completely. Not grief, not shame. Calculation collapsing. What does that mean? She asked. It means, Sylvia answered calmly, the reading room cannot legally be neutralized, removed, or repurposed under any proposed sale structure connected to the trust. Peter looked physically ill now. Good. He needed to feel it fully. Not because I hated him, because weak men only become honest when consequences finally remove the comfort of pretending confusion. Then Sylvia reached the final page. Due to the triggering conditions already documented, Peter Johnson is suspended from all property and trust-related transition authority pending long-term review. Peter closed his eyes. Amber snapped immediately. You can't do that. Sylvia looked at her over the rim of her glasses. I already did. That sentence hit the room like a hammer. Robbie cleared his throat nervously. For the record, my office is withdrawing immediately from any listing discussion involving the Johnson property. Candace nodded too. And I will be documenting that no informed consent was ever provided by Danny Johnson regarding relocation planning. One by one, the structure Amber built around me started collapsing. Not through revenge, through witnesses. Truth is slower than manipulation, but it leaves heavier footprints. Amber stood abruptly. This house is destroying everyone. I looked around slowly. The shelves, the scarf, the books, the candle, the urn, the chair where Lorna used to read stories to frightened children. Then I looked back at Amber. No, I said quietly. This house is the only reason some of us still remember how to be human. That ended her, not legally, emotionally. Because for the first time since the memorial dinner, nobody in the room looked at her like the reasonable adult anymore. They looked at her like someone who tried to erase grief because it interfered with profit. Peter finally broke. He covered his face with both hands and whispered, I'm sorry, Dad. Not enough, but real. And real mattered more than polished excuses. When everyone finally started leaving, Tessa walked quietly to the mantel and straightened Lorna's library card beside the urn. Tiny gesture, huge meaning. Then she looked at her father and said, Grandma wasn't dust. She was the reason this house ever felt warm. Peter started crying again. I did not comfort him, not yet. Because forgiveness without truth is just permission for people to do it again later. After the room emptied, Sylvia stayed behind a moment longer. She placed one final document in front of me. Family Dignity Clause, draft revision. I looked at her. What's this? Sylvia glanced toward Lorna's reading room. It's what happens when one woman refuses to let grief become a business strategy. I touched the edge of the paper slowly. Then I looked back at Lorna's urn glowing softly beside the candlelight and realized Amber lost far more than a house that day. She lost control of the story. Chapter 11. The room Lorna refused to let die. 3 months later, the house felt different, not happier. Healing is quieter than happiness. The donation boxes were gone. The staging stickers disappeared. The buyer walkthrough never happened. And every Saturday morning, the South Reading Room filled with people again. Not because I forced it to, because Lorna built something stronger than property value. She built belonging. June Mercer helped me reopen the room officially as the Lorna Johnson Memory Reading Room. Alma Reed brought folding chairs from the church basement. Tessa organized books by hand exactly the way her grandmother used to. Even Milo returned the bent bookmarks to the lamp table after smoothing them beneath heavy encyclopedias for 2 weeks. One of those bookmarks still reads, Books help people, Stay. Funny thing is, I think the child understood the whole story better than most adults. Amber never came back to the house after the legal review meeting. Under the revised trust structure and the new family dignity clause, she was permanently removed from any communication involving the property, the trust, or my personal care decisions. No more transition planning, no more soft words hiding sharp intentions. Just distance. Peter's consequences hurt differently. He lost all property and trust authority connected to the house for at least 5 years. Sylvia required family mediation before any review could happen. He also had to formally withdraw every assisted living authorization and property transition document connected to my name. But the hardest punishment was not legal. It was personal. For the first time in his life, Peter had to look directly at what weakness had turned him into. Not a monster. That would have been simpler. Just a frightened, middle-aged man who let money pressure and fear of instability slowly replace his courage. And that happens more often in families than people admit, especially now. By 2026, I watched good people panic over mortgage rates, medical debt, layoffs, insurance costs, retirement fears, and college bills. America feels tired lately. Everybody is calculating survival all the time. But pressure does not excuse cruelty. Fear does not give people permission to erase the dignity of older parents just because memories take up space inside a valuable house. That lesson cost my family dearly. One Saturday afternoon, Peter finally came back alone. No Amber, no excuses. He stood in the doorway of the reading room while children colored bookmarks beside the window. His eyes stayed fixed on Lorna's chair. "I'll say it," he told me quietly. I nodded once. So Peter turned toward the room, toward Tessa, June, Alma, and the people gathered there, and finally spoke the truth without hiding behind management language. "I let my wife treat my mother's ashes like clutter because I wanted the house money, and because facing grief felt harder than pretending Dad was the problem." Nobody interrupted him, not even June. Peter wiped his face hard with one hand. "I thought if the room disappeared, maybe the pain would too." That line stayed with me, because grief scares people who think everything painful should be cleaned up quickly. But grief is not trash. It is proof that love existed long enough to leave damage behind. I did not hug Peter that day. Some movies would do that. Real life is slower. Instead, I pulled out the chair beside mine and said, "You can sit here again, but you don't get to rewrite what happened." He nodded. And for now, that was enough. The house still carries Lorna everywhere. Her navy scarf hangs beside the reading room lamp. Her library card rests near the mantel. Her handwriting remains tucked inside books all over the shelves. And the urn? It still sits exactly where it always did. Not because I'm trapped in grief, because memory deserves a place to live openly. That was the thing Amber never understood. A home is not valuable because buyers want it. A home becomes sacred because somebody once made people feel safe inside it. Lorna did that every single day. And even after death, she still protected the people she loved from becoming disposable. Thank you for spending this time with me today. Please tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are right now. And wherever you are, please take care of your health, your peace, and the people who still make your house feel warm. If this story touched your heart even a little, don't forget to subscribe to Final Act Revenge. Another story is waiting for you on your screen right now, and YouTube believes you may enjoy it too.